Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of funder feedback and how we can maximize feedback from funders to help us achieve our fundraising goals.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Cynthia Rojas. Just want to come on here, Cynthia. Good morning. Welcome to the show. We'll unmute your mic. Pia is taking the day off today. She's off in Washington, D.C. So when she comes back, she'll have to tell us all about her exciting trip.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am good. I am really, really good. And I'm excited about this show because this is what leaders always want to know. Like, how do we get feedback, and how do we incorporate it in a way that aligns with our mission? So it's a great show today.
Absolutely. You know, funder feedback is one of those areas where I don't think that we as organizations maximize its potential enough. Sometimes it's a little intimidating to reach out to funders and ask them, questions like, why didn't you fund us? Or can you give any feedback on our grant applications? But there's also that area of reaching out to funders and asking them what we did well. So in organizational leadership, in your niche, Cynthia, how important is reaching out to get that feedback on the positive scale as well?
Well, I love that, right? Because we tend to think about getting feedback when things don't go well. But this idea of getting feedback when we do something well. And it's all part of the relationship building, which is what you are constantly reminding us about, that it's instrumental to have relationships with your funders before they become your funders and during the funding relationship, and even after, right? So you have a Rolodex. Did I just say Rolodex?
Yeah, but that's okay.
I said Rolodex. I bet you half of our viewers have no idea what that is. But you have a long contact list of funders in your, because you specialize in grant writing, and you maintain your relationships. And so if there's anything I've learned from you, is maintaining, keeping, and building that relationship is key, even when they're not your funder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wanted to let everyone know today's Coffee Time episode is a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. So if you have any experience that you want to share in the comments, or introduce yourself and let us know where you're from, we'd love to hear your experience with getting that positive funder feedback.
That's a nice way to do the intro 3.5 minutes in.
Well,
That's clever.
So.
That's clever. I love that. I also, talk about benchmarks. So it's March 25th, 2022. The state of Connecticut shut down on March 20th,
Wow.
2020. Yeah. It has been just over 2 years since we recognized that COVID-19 was a pandemic, and we had to mandate for people to stay home in order to keep them alive. And so the reason why that's so big for us, for you, myself, and PETA, is that we started this show because of the pandemic. And we're here 2 years later, and we've even had to change the focus. We used to focus on leading during the pandemic, and now we are focusing on leading during complex times. So I have known you and called you my friend for 2 years, Rebecca.
Oh, me too. Thank you. Put me in your Rolodex. I know, it's crazy to think about, but with that transition, with the adaptation, we spent a lot of time talking about adaptation and new norms. But with that also came changes in funding. And I saw it just in my work alone, a tremendous amount of new opportunity to be able to gather and collect funder feedback, to have more conversation with funders where it used to be a very strict process. Now it's gotten a little bit more flexible because of COVID. So the ability to nurture and grow relationships with funders and get that critical feedback has been, I think, easier since the pandemic.
Yes, yes. Also knowing, so funders also have focal areas, they also have vision, they also have a mission, right?
Mhm.
And through these conversations, you are able to see if your mission and vision aligns with theirs. And this is important because I had an executive director tell me, "Oh, I can't go to that funder because they're only funding COVID related things." However,
Mm.
her programming changed because of COVID. She expanded her audience. We did a community survey, and the audience said, the respondents said, how well of a job they did during COVID. In my eyes, she should be part of the pool of people who get funding because of COVID. I think she was thinking food bank, right?
Oh,
Those kinds of funding. But if you know your funders, you know what their vision is. So that's another important reason.
interestingly, I find that when organizations are unsure or they sort of put that stop up of, well, we don't really fit into the COVID priorities with the funder, so we're not going to attempt to apply. I think oftentimes it's because organizations don't understand or don't know necessarily how to clearly articulate the ask. And that's where the feedback comes in, because if you're unsure of how to articulate how you fit in or what you would ask or how you formulate your narrative, the opportunity to outreach in advance of your proposal to a program officer and ask questions and talk it out with them, they're more than willing to do that, I would say, in 99% of the cases. And taking advantage in a courteous way of reaching out to those program officers, to those foundations ahead of your application, can help um, clarify some of those unknowns. And it's interesting because, so I write grants for clients all over the country, and the way that grants are written on the West Coast is drastically different than the East Coast. Even the fundraising approach in general, it goes without saying that you will reach out to foundations before you apply for grants and before you submit for capacity building and other funding. On the West Coast, that's just common practice for them, and it's highly expected of from the funder for applicants to do that. Whereas I think on the East Coast, we're a little more timid about doing that, about following that process, even though funders are saying, give us a call, here's the Q&A, submit questions, we're here to help you. So it's really interesting to see the different dynamics and the different approach.
I didn't realize that the cultures were so different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
It's really
totally East Coast. I'm totally East Coast. Yeah, when I first started working in the nonprofit sector, I was intimidated by funders, and so I was one of those people that you're talking about. It's totally cultural, totally cultural. I didn't realize that.
It's really interesting. And it's also a great way to meet program officers, to meet foundations, get to know them, because even if you're reaching out to, let's say, 3 foundations, but you're not quite sure about one of them you're like, this really is a right fit for us, we're going to go ahead and apply. And the other one might be something that you're forecasting later, so we might apply in the future. Reaching out to 3 different program officers with 3 different funds and having conversations with them is not only educational, but it's a great way to introduce your organization to different foundations and learn more about their work while they're at the same time learning about your work. And even if they can't fund you, or you received a declination letter, they might recommend you to other foundations within their networks. So feedback isn't limited just to are we a right fit to apply, or why did we receive a declination? It's also, to have the opportunity to ask those foundations questions to help navigate your path for forward funding, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. Funders are a pool of resources. Oh my, could they help us with so many things? And so I love that you're saying use them for that as well, not just for getting feedback on your application or on your proposal. One thing that I think we could also one reason why we're having this conversation is that this is the series on learning, right? How can you become a learning organization? And um, the steps to that is getting feedback, making sense of it. So lots of sense making, which are conversations about really looking at stuff and asking and um, and then using that information to be better, to do things a different way, or to articulate why you're doing something. So you don't always have to change what you're doing. Sometimes it's just a matter people don't know what you're doing. And so you don't want a funder to learn about you for the first time through a piece of paper.
Right, right.
So
And
you
if you
want
do, you have to have a really, really tight persuasive narrative, which is tough. It's really tough. I mean, even what someone consider the simplest form of grant writing is still difficult because we are now, the amount of funding available has grown exponentially since the pandemic. So now there's more what you would call competition in the space to apply for funds. So we need to really hone in. And one of my students in the class yesterday was talking about niching down. You really need to niche down your unique differentiator to get your proposal to stand out. And what better way to do that than to use and incorporate some funder feedback, funder engagement in the process?
Yeah, and it's not just COVID, right? A lot of funders also want to make sure that they are practicing equitable practices in their funding. And what they've done or what they're doing is actively seeking out your smaller, grassroots, often BIPOC led organizations to make sure that they are at the table and that they understand that they too are eligible for funding and really working with them to understand that part of the work. Grassroots organizations tend to struggle because they're less institutionalized. They don't have a development director. So this push toward equity and funders really looking at trust-based philanthropy and focusing on diversifying their pool of grantees has created a lot of change, and the competition is higher as a result. You could be competing with someone who's never been funded, but because of very intentional outreach, that person is now in the pool of candidates.
Absolutely. And funding that's out there isn't just limited to grant applications. There are direct donations, there's legacy giving, there's a whole portfolio of development. And what I've found with a lot of our clients is that we'll apply for funding for grants, and then the program officers will reach back out and say, there are other funds within our foundation that we would like you to write up a letter of introduction so that we can pass it along to some of the other donors within our foundation. And we have actually gotten matching gifts that way. We've gotten the same amount, if not greater, than we've gotten from the grant applications we've submitted. So never underestimate just how much your message carries when you speak with a foundation officer, speak with a donor, or submit your applications and interests. Even your letters of interest can carry quite a bit further than just that initial approach. So it's fantastic. I think what funders are doing is extremely generous, but it's been a fantastic transition in that realm. If we could look on the brighter side of COVID pandemic.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of good things that have come out of this pandemic. And there were 2 points. I need to start writing stuff down because I'm getting to that age where it just flees out of me. Oh, Rebecca, have you ever intentionally applied for something, assuming you weren't going to get it the first time, but you would lose using it as a learning tool to then improve your application the second time?
That's a really good question, Cynthia. I don't think that I've ever applied knowing we wouldn't get it, but rather we applied knowing it might be a long shot. So, and using that experience to make improvements in the next round, absolutely.
Yes.
And also using that experience, and by using, I mean in a functional, respectful way, using that experience to introduce our organization to the funder. And another example I can give you is we may have applied for a grant under a community heading, whereas maybe it was more of a right fit for a neighborhood investment grant. And so the funder actually, with their feedback, they directed us to apply next time for the neighborhood funding because we didn't really fit within the community header of that particular fund. So that's a really smart way of navigating your grant portfolio. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So I have heard of individuals doing that, and I thought, wow, what a great way to incorporate learning, right? So they didn't put the grant in their budget. There was no expectations except that they would get feedback. And it was the type of funding application where it's based on a point system.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get like really concrete feedback in terms of the number of points that they lost. Malasao has a couple of comments in the comment page, but before this one, she had mentioned promote is what my boss always says. Yes, we have to promote our organizations, and every time you submit an application, you are promoting your mission and vision.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it should be consistent across all media, all modalities. So what you're writing on the page should be what your website says, should be what your letters of interest say. That's really important, especially if you have outdated information or programs that you no longer run. You really want to be on top of how you're presenting your information and promoting your organization. That's a great point, Myra. Thank you.
Yeah. And then, so even Myra has used it for interviews. So she's gone to an interview knowing she wouldn't get it for the practice. So the practice is important. The practice is important. I do want to say something about the website that you just mentioned, Rebecca. Sure. There was a time, right? So I love, Ma say, you know how I feel about interviews. Yes. So Ma is not fond of interviews. And so, getting that practice is really important. So, but going in with no expectations, I think is key, because if not, it could dampen your confidence. So you want to be clear of why you're doing it. So now I forgot the point I was going to make.
You were saying there was a time.
There was a time where there were no websites. There was no internet. Can you imagine? And I was alive during that time. And so when we first started doing websites, the big deal was it was a way to get business, right? People would go on the internet, they would look up, they would put in some keywords, and your website would pop up. Well, now business development is done in a very different way, and it's much more targeted. But websites, and this is the point that I'm coming to, websites are so important because although they may not be driving business, it is how people learn about you. Mm-hmm. And so you just made the point, Rebecca, about making sure that your website is updated. And I cannot tell you how many times I go to websites and I can see that they're not updated. And it's not good because that's how people are conducting their research about you. Mm-hmm. So let's get those websites updated.
The other piece of that too is we can learn a lot about foundations and funders and donors by visiting their website. They publish a lot of white papers. We should be reading that material. We should be connecting with them on social and and paying attention and learning about the things that funders say they care about. And that's, I believe, another way to gain funder feedback, especially if you can get into that funder social media engagement. We could be conversing with funders in real time on media to show that we're making an investment in what they believe in, and vice versa, that we share the same mission and vision. So that's a great way to get feedback as well, that sometimes we
Yeah.
don't think about.
Well, let me ask you, Rebecca, what happens when, so we've been talking about funders. Let's talk about donors, right? Because many organizations have major donors. And what happens when, first, we should talk about how do we get feedback from our donors. But in that conversation, I would also like to ask you what happens when the donor has a different vision that is not completely aligned with your programs. So, how do we get donor feedback? Let's start there.
Okay. So we receive donor feedback by just asking, right? So if I have an organization that I care about as a person, as a human being, then I'm willing to donate to them because I want to see and help their success. And so I give my gift. And then sometimes you don't hear anything from the organization other than the prescribed thank you note, right? But we should be calling those donors and thanking them. Thank you for this gift. What made you give? What compelled you? What resonated within you that we're doing here by way of our mission at our organization? And asking them why they gave is huge, because I give to things that are important to me because they either remind me of my children, or they remind me of a family member or a friend who may have passed away, or that is currently, loving in my life, that I just, this is a great organization. Something pulled at my heartstrings and made me want to participate there.
Yeah.
And asking is really, I think, number one, doing that personal outreach, again, back to the relationships.
Yeah.
And another is using your data. I wish Peter was here with us today, right? We could talk about that data that we, where are people giving from geographically? If we're collecting any other demographic data, what did the data tell us? And how much are people giving? What are the trends in giving? So have we received more, or are we in a funding dip, which can be discouraging to folks? But I believe if your fundraising was up here last year and then it kind of dipped down and is slowly going back up, there's a reason for that dip. And so paying attention to that time period, reaching out to donors who maybe gave historically during that time period or did give during that time period is really important, because that signals to me that we need a shift in our fundraising efforts, that what we are traditionally doing isn't meeting the needs of our donors. So there's a lot of feedback we can extract, but I think it really centers on outreach and then looking at your data.
Yeah. And, you get so much information just looking at the trends. And there's a lot of fear or anxiety among executive directors and CEOs of nonprofit organizations, because the pandemic for many organizations actually increased donor giving. And there's a suspicion, or there's a fear that that's going to dip after this pandemic starts to feel less urgent. And what I'm hoping leaders are doing is using their data. Look at the donors pre-pandemic, donors during the pandemic, make some sense out of that, and begin to develop strategies to keep, especially if you got new donors, to keep your donors, the ones you gained through the pandemic, post-pandemic, or when things start to level down. A lot of leaders are feeling that this is the new normal. And so that pressure that we all felt in the beginning of the pandemic has really slowed down. So we might be arriving at a state of equilibrium. And now is the time to start looking at your data. Keep those new donors. Find
And making it easy. I don't mean to interrupt you, Cynthia. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, just making it easy for people to give, right? Electronic giving is huge, right? Very rarely do we see paper checks come anymore. Some people prefer that, and that's fine. But make it easy for people to give. And your outreach conversations with people should not always be an ask, right? Because if you're always asking me for something, I'll be like, well, she's only calling me because she wants something, even though I'm in her Rolodex, right?
Yes. I want to say this because I love my alma mater, and they've done a great job at increasing my donations.
Oh, great.
And so I think they're highly skilled in that. However, they only call me for money. I love that they call me, right? But can the director or the VP of development call me every once in a while and say, thank you. Thank you for increasing your giving throughout the years. And I've never gotten that call.
Maybe they're not looking at the data.
Yeah. Maybe she's listening and she'll call me now. But it's that balance, right? And it's funny because they come up on my phone. They are a contact on my phone because we've been doing this for years. And I love talking to them. And I'll ask them, can you tell me what I gave all of last year or 2 years ago? Like because I'm in the industry, I get very curious, and so and I love their strategy, but they don't do personal thank yous, which is really interesting.
And you'll hear a lot, well, we just don't have the manpower or woman power to be able to do that, right? But you have a board of directors who's more than willing and able to help you. That's why they're there. They're volunteering their time. So if you can split up the donor list into quarters by, people, if you have one board member calling 10 donors, just checking in, it can be done. I think organizations underestimate just how much power in people they have to be able to outreach, whereas they narrow it down to think it's only limited to paid staff, but volunteers are willing to help. You just have to ask them.
Yeah. And I love the words please and thank you. I love those two words. I love to hear them. I love to write them. And I think if you are fundraising in any capacity, whether you're CEO or an actual director of development, saying thank you is really important, which is why it's a pet peeve with me and my alma mater, because they can call me. They have no problem calling me, asking me for money. And they actually tell me how much to donate, which is a great thing. This is how they've increased my donation. Would you like this for us? Would you like to donate X, Y, Z? And I'm like, yeah. I don't know.
A secret to increasing giving is splitting the donation annually by month. So a lot of organizations have put on monthly giving. So if you give $25 a month or $100 a month, it adds up oftentimes to greater than you gave for that year annually, or that one-time gift. And it's also electronically processed oftentimes, so you kind of don't think about it as going out, There are so many clever ways that you can request support from individuals and organizations.
Yeah, I just learned this weekend that there is a library. It is a free library that so far has every book that I have searched. It has millions and millions of books, and they have decided to do a fundraising campaign. So I think I used them 5 times and I donated because I was like, oh my, what a wonderful resource. It's called zlibrary.org. And
I'm going to write that down.
Or maybe .com. It has academic journals and books. And I tell you, it's changed my life. And I'm mentioning this because it's aligned with what you're saying, Rebecca. They made it so easy. I went on the website to do some research, and on the top it said, you have used us 6 times. Are you finding us, I don't know, beneficial? If so, donate. Press the button and literally just my name, my credit card, and hit send.
That's an
outline.
easy way to give.
Yeah. Yes. So that's
So-
important as well.
That's great. That's really great. And I hope everyone looks up that resource because I know I sure will. So thank you for sharing.
Yes,
So
thelibrary.com or .org.
We're at the 30-minute mark, but I know you had a second half of your question.
So, oh yes, thank you. So what happens when you have a major donor, so you're talking big money, and their vision is not quite aligned with your programming? What's a CEO to do?
That's a really difficult position to be in. I think it all depends upon that misalignment. Is it a new shift in your focus? Is it a new shift in the donor's focus? The best thing that I think that organization or executive director should do is reach out to their donors and let them know what the change is, what the new direction is, and if it is obviously hopefully for favorable reasons, being able to explain that change in direction, shift in momentum. You might be surprised and find that they will give to you because of that outreach, because they understand that new focus that you've taken on. Or if the funder or the donor has taken on a new focus, reaching out and asking them about that new direction and seeing if any of your work that's shifted, any of your adaptations match up with that new direction of that donor. I think it all starts with conversations. And if you've been stewarding that relationship over time, then that outreach should come pretty comfortably to that executive director.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I was thinking of an example, and I know we're over, and maybe we'll pick it up next week. But something like, what if you were providing some kind of training, and a donor came to you and said, "I want to fund your childcare during these trainings," and you're not ready to be licensed for that. You don't have staff that can watch the children, and it would require setting something up. What happens in that scenario? Well, you're gonna have to watch us next week to get the answer.
Yes, that's a juicy one. I can't wait to talk about it.
Yes. All right, Rebecca, this has been fun. Mala Sal, thank you so much as always for joining us. I feel like you're part of our team. And Peter, please know, she's probably listening. Please know that we missed you, and we'll see you next week.
Yay.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.